So first off, now that I'm, how far have you guys gotten in the videos? Have you guys watched up to the at least through the generics and wrapper class video, right? Like I asked. Awesome. Was that too much to ask to do, or
No?
no? Okay.
It's fine.
Okay. And also, there was a bit less for this week because we only did have one lecture this week. So next week, the upcoming videos I'm going to do are going to be on, Big O notation and the like. Of course, that I recognize that a lot of people are going to be out next week because of the. If you're Jewish, you're going to be probably out during Rosh Hashanah. I'll be here for Rosh Hashanah, which is next week, but I'll probably not be here the week afterwards, which is Yom Kippur. It's just simply because I don't feel good about missing 2 weeks in a row when I'm teaching. So, it'd be one thing if I was a student. Again, though, there will be video lectures to watch those weeks. It'll just be that I'll try my best to avoid that the quizzes will be more in the labs. All right. So the next. But anyway, if you guys, if you're going to be out that week, just let or you need an extension on assignments because of that, let me know. Yes.
Just a question about the videos real quick. About how many do you think you'll upload per week?
The number of videos, no idea because that depends, right? Because there's always the odd there's the odd 2-minute video or 5-minute video, but I try to aim between 2 and 3 hours of content a week about. Okay, that's where I try to go. Also because doing any more than that for me is kind of ludicrous. And if I happen to do more of that because I do stuff in advance, I'll give you the cutoff point because the semester fortunately does build itself on a week by week basis. So the focus is going to be more on array lists next week and working with array lists. As well as Big O notation and algorithmic efficiency, so a bit more math stuff next week. Also next week during lab is your first timed lab. And remember, a timed lab will be about 3% of your grade. So the way a timed lab works is that it is a mini exam. The difference between this exam and the other exams is you get to use your computer or the lab computer. So be sure, if you're going to be doing it on the lab computer, make sure you've logged in and done work on that computer so you don't eat up too much time, trying to get stuff set up. And what I typically do is I hand you a document, much like the assignment that you got this week. The assignment you got this for this week's homework. They should be around maybe the slightest bit harder than what you got, but definitely around the, they're not going to be too much harder. They just are going to be different, and it'll be about 3% of your grade, which is a good kind of check to make sure how you're doing, and it's also good practice for the exam. So if for some reason you have an emergency, you're going to miss that timed lab, please let me know as soon as possible. That way we can reschedule for you as best as possible. I can do a lot more for you if you let me know before before the lab than after the lab. All right. So, and that includes if you're sick. If you're sick, just don't come. Yes. I won't have office hours on the Wednesday, so I'll be here next week. The week afterwards, which let's pull it down the calendar. So this week I will. So the week of the 10th, 11th, and 12th, I'll be there for office hours. I should be there for office hours on the 17th, and on the 18th, it depends because because Yom Kippur starts that night, right? Because of the way Jewish holiday works. They start in the evening and they go from sundown to sundown. If I need to, I can meet with somebody beforehand on Tuesday, but I won't be there at all during the Wednesday. And if you need to meet with me on Thursdays or Fridays, just send me an email otherwise. So, yeah, it shouldn't be too much of an impact. And of course, I'm going to be there during the office hours otherwise. And your TAs will also have their office hours, and all the TAs have had their office hours input. I think there's office hours on Tuesday, Thursday. So I think there's office hours on basically every day that I don't have an office hour myself. So they're at different times, and they may conflict with the lab schedule depending on what lab you take or not. But that's because everybody's got essentially each TA makes sure they just don't schedule it during their lab session or our lectures, and that's about it. And of course, if you want to meet with them or me during some other time, you can just send them an email. They're here most of the time. They're doing research, so if you just let them know you're coming or want to meet with them, they'll be able to meet with you. Okay. So how are people doing on the Rabbit? Did people manage to get the Rabbit assignment done? Okay. Is there anybody who feels like they need more time really to get that done? Yes. Maybe like an extra day. Were there people here who showed up late, who registered late? All right. So how many people would say they would like maybe an extra day, till the end of the day to finish working on it? A couple of you? Okay. Okay, that's fine. So that's no problem. Okay, so the videos are going fine. So again, since the exercises are dealing with array lists, you definitely want to watch the videos on array lists, especially the one where I go into where I use JShell to show you all the things the list can do, because those are the things that are going to be useful for writing your assignments. The other videos on building the array list, they're useful for understanding how it works, and that's kind of required for the next portion, which is when we figure out how efficiently these lists work, because these array lists are good for making some things one ways or some things another, but not so great for other applications. So some lists are better than others depending on the application. All right, so what questions do you guys have about generics before we take a quiz on that? Do people have questions about about basically the way generics work? Right, so let's go ahead and then just start out with a couple of questions. So what is the purpose of a generic? How do you use it? Like if I've got a public static void main here, pretend it was in an actual class. Right, if I wanted to, how could I use generics in conjunction with a list, and what would that do for me? Yes?
It would restrict what kind of objects you can put into the list?
Yeah, you can restrict what kind of object you're going to put into a list. So, for instance, a list of strings, right, S, is equal to a new array list of strings, right, and that would just simply restrict what you can put into it. What happens if I leave out this whole generic declaration? If I don't have this, right? If it looks like this instead, on both sides. Let me just get to that. What happens if I remove this? It accepts all objects, right? Accepts anything that I put in. What's the disadvantage of this?
You put like an integer and then like a string or something, and you print it out. It's only depending if you want to print out all the integers, when you get an error,
yeah. Essentially, if you mix and match your types, right? Say I wanted to make a list of list of ints, right? And I just put in ints into this list, but then I accidentally add a string in there, right? Then the issue I'm going to have is that when I do something like add everything up, right? I'm going to get an error. Furthermore, you can't actually directly add stuff, right? Because Java's going to be like, well, you're putting objects in there. I can't keep track of you just putting ints in there because you told me that you're just putting objects in there. So you would have to cast everything that you're getting out of it, right? You'd have to tell Java explicitly that every item I'm grabbing out of this is an integer, which is kind of annoying, right? Now, of course, I can't do this. I can't create a list of int here, right? I can't do that. Yes? Yeah, what do you do instead?
You would use a wrapper, because it has to be an object.
Right, it has to be a class type. It has to be a type that you can make objects of, right? Right? Yes, so it has to be a list of integers. So what are wrapper classes? then. They're these classes that do what for us? Yeah.
So that tells you like what's in the list.
I mean, that's what the generics do. Yeah.
But the term primitive types of the objects take from objects upward.
Yeah, you can, it's not so much it turns into them. I mean, it does do that with autoboxing, which I'll go over, but basically is that they're object versions of primitives, is the simple way to put it. But as you said, you can you can use them to turn any primitive into an object, right? I can go like this, integer 6, and this will store 6 in I. It will convert this integer into an object, and that object will hold that data for you. And this is useful when you want to treat something like an object. When you want to treat a primitive like an object. Now there's a wrapper class for every single class. So there's integer for int, right? What do you guess the double is? I think I've shown you guys what you use for double instead. Capital D double. Any guess for what character for what we use for characters? Cars, you know? We use character. We use the full word character, which is a bit annoying to have to type that out. Any guess for the Boolean type? Capital B Boolean, right? Capital B Boolean. So those are all, which is interesting, which means actually now you can use 3 different values for Boolean type, actually. You can use true, you can use false, and you can also, if for some godforsaken reason you want to do this, it's terrible, but you could, it's a hack, you could also use null to represent a value for Boolean. Now you can have 3 truth values if you really want to go around it. Boolean, true, false, and null. Don't do that. That's a terrible idea. Okay. There's also, of course, wrappers for everything else that you want to use. That you might not use, like floats for the smaller floating points, right? The 32-bit floating point numbers versus the 64-bit. Long for longs. You even use bytes, which is useful because that will have methods handling, literal bytes. So there's a wrapper class for every class, and we use them basically in 2 ways. We use them when we want to represent objects when we want to, store objects in lists. The other way to do it, and I'm going to boot up the terminal for this to show you, is that we use wrapper classes because they have a ton of utility static variables in them, right? So like integer dot max, I think it's max value. Yeah, so that stores the maximum value that an integer can be, and you can just simply make sure that you can check against this value to make sure you're not overflowing. If you try to do this, right, and add 1 to it, you overflow, right? Then that's just simply, I don't know if your professor showed you how the way binary works, but essentially adding 1 makes it overflow and wrap around into the negatives. That's just the way that binary integers are stored, right? So it's having values like that, as well as values to basically grab a, I think there's a parse int method in integer that allows you to grab a integer from a string, right? So there's all sorts of valuable methods that are stored in these wrapper classes and valuable functions. All right, so we use generics to restrict the types we use. We use wrapper classes when we want to use them in place of things. So now we'll go ahead and take your second quiz. This one should be fairly easy, and I should have fixed all the bugs on it from our first one from the evening class where there were a couple of bugs, and I had to. So you'll notice that there's a second attempt that you can take on it. So, so the password is for this quiz 222222. So that's 6 number 2s in a row. Grade A security right here, people. But now, with regards to these quizzes, I think there was a miscommunication in one of the sections that said basically, oh, you can take the quizzes anytime. You're intended to take the quizzes, in class, right? That was, I think, a miscommunication, so that wasn't too much of an issue this first week, but take the quizzes in class from now on. And again, there should be free B points for this quiz.